Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Jai Bhim. It is indeed a great pleasure as well as an honor to be under the auspices of Dr. Ambedkar International Center, New Delhi, and delighted to join in Zoom meeting to speak on the subject Babasaheb Ambedkar on nation and nationalism. Well, friends, Bharat Ratna Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar was undoubtedly one of the most illustrious sons of India. He appeared on the Indian socio in the early 1920s and remained at the forefront cultural, economic, and political transformation of our country during the closing decades of the British Empire. After India became independent British rule in 1947, Dr. Ambedkar played a role in laying the foundation of modern India. Ambedkar was a great social reformer, crusader for human rights, and emancipator of the downtrodden masses of India. He was truly an intellectual colossus and a great national leader who dedicated all his life to bring in a new dawn of enlightenment in modern India. Who was the person who emphasized will be Indians first, Indians last, but Indian in between? It was none other than Dr. Babasaheb. Dr. Ambedkar made a historic speech November 1949 before the Constituent Assembly. The very next day, Constitution was approved by the Constituent Assembly. In that speech, at one point, Ambedkar said, "It is not that India was never an independent country. The point is that she lost her independence, once lost the independence she had. Will she lose it a second time? It is this thought which makes me most anxious for the future." Then he went on to add, this anxiety is deepened by the realization fact that in addition to our enemies in the form of castes and creeds, we are going to have many political parties with diverse political creeds. Will Indians place the country creed, or will they place creed above our country? No, he said. But this much is certain, that if political parties place creed above country, our will be put in jeopardy a second time and probably be lost ever. This eventuality we must resolutely against. We must be determined to defend our independence to the last drop of our blood. That was the spirit of them that he had. At the same, during the same speech, Dr. Ambedkar said, and I quote again, "What we must do, not be content with the mere political democracy. We must make our political democracy a social as well. Political democracy cannot last unless there lies at the base of it, social democracy. There must be a social democracy at the base of political democracy. What does social mean? He defines that. He said, and I quote, "It means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, and fraternity as the principles of life." Unquote. So Dr. Ambedkar's vision was to build a society based on liberty, equity, fraternity, and social justice. Striving to achieve these was Ambedkar's idea of nationalism. During the same speech, he had warned, and this is my favorite quote, Dr. Ambedkar had warned all of us, and I quote, on June 26, 1950, we are going to enter into a contradiction. In politics, we will have equality, and in an economic life, we will have inequality. In recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one vote. In our social and economic life, we shall, by the reason of social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. He said, how long shall we continue to live with this life of contradiction? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and life? If we continue to deny it for long, we will do so only by putting our political democracy at peril. We will do so. We must, therefore, remove this contradiction at the earliest possible moment, or else those who suffer from equality will blow up the structure of our political democracy. This assembly, that is that constituent assembly, has so built up. Unquote. Dr. Ambedkar was a multi-faceted genius. I can identify 12 major facets of his persona, of his genius. First, he was a knowledge seeker par excellence. Second, he was economist extraordinaire. Third, he was social reformer and downtrodden. Fourth, he was outstanding economic administrator. Five, he was educationist with a social conscience. Sixth, he was champion of caste. Seventh, he was anthropologist with a difference. He was epoch-making statesman. 9, he was the first law in the country, India. 10, he was the principal architect of the Indian Constitution. He was the critic of the linguistic reorganization. And 12th and final dimension of his multifaceted genius, he was the modern day champion of Buddhism, also called Bauddha Dhamma Chakra Pravartak. That is a wide range of personality of Ambedkar. In conformity with the subject at hand, that is the nation and nationality, I'm going to pick and choose few dimensions consistent with the overall theme of this speech. Ambedkar's life was an incredible saga of struggle. Although he was humiliated every step of the way, childhood to his youth, he succeeded against all odds in the highest and most reputable degrees from world-class universities. He had his MA from Columbia University, United States, had his PhD from Columbia University in United States. Then he went over to England, had Doctor of Science degree in from London School of Economics. 3 degrees were in economics, and while working on his degree of Doctor of Science, he did law and got a degree of barrister at law. So all these achieved in the world-class universities, and it's an incredible achievement for that time and with so that Dr. Ambedkar had. With all these great degrees, Dr. Ambedkar of India, he returned to India and devoted his life against caste-ridden Hindu social order, which was characterized by injustice and denial of human rights. Without being favored either by family fortune or by political lineage, but by sheer grit of his determination, hard work, supreme courage, and selfless sacrifice, Ambedkar overcame bitter political opposition and ill-successful nation to become the principal architect of the Indian Constitution of independent India. He then proceeded to build the safeguards of action for establishing a more equitable society capable of delivering social justice to millions of downtrodden. In this process, Dr. Ambedkar emerged as the conscious of modern India. Friends, traditionally, the texts are replete with the stories of life and times of Mahatma Gandhi and Nehru. The pedagogy portrays them, and rightly so, as the leaders of nature in prose and poem, in skit and song. Regrettably, however, Ambedkar appears only marginally, and even when he does appear, invariably referred to as the leader of the untouchables. Dr. Ambedkar's mission in pedagogy has always been more as a caste leader than a national leader. It is grossly unfair to characterize simply as the leader of untouchables or Dalits, as it is often done, even in otherwise responsible quarters. Dr. Ambedkar was not simply of untouchables and oppressed people of our country. He was a national leader, period. Dr. Ambedkar's erudition, mass movements, his role in the government in heralding action towards inclusive gender equality, emphasizing education for all, employment development with liberal welfare measures, labor welfare measures, clear that Dr. Ambedkar was a patriot of a sterling order. The course of his most eventful life, Dr. Ambedkar made some contribution as an economist, as a sociologist, as an anthropologist, journalist, an authority on comparative religion, policymaker, and of course, parliamentarian. In spite of being a statesman and actor, Dr. Ambedkar always remained a reflective thinker and a mass leader. Ambedkar, despite being engrossed in mass movements and upheavals, Dr. Ambedkar wrote remarkable treatises on economics, sociology, anthropology, politics, religion, law, culture. No other politician in our country comes anywhere close to achieving the amount of voluminous that Dr. Ambedkar did. The sheer volume of his writings is amazing. Analytical rigor, lucidity, insights, and passion in Dr. writings exude him as a, it's truly the range of Dr. Ambedkar's writing is equally. On politics, for example, he wrote 11 books. I'm not going to talk about, but on politics, one book that he wrote was very important, and that was his treatise, Pakistan or Partition of India. Actually, the demand for Pakistan came for the first time in March 1940, and by the end of that year, within 8 months, Dr. Ambedkar produced a 480-page book. And this was the first book of its kind. And then second edition in 1945, that time it was called Thoughts on Pakistan, that at the time of discussion on partition between Gandhi and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, both of them regarded Dr. book, Thoughts on Pakistan, as the most important standards of reference. All the scholarly work that was always done keeping in mind our nation He was never parochial as a scholar in his writings or in action. Dr. Ambedkar returned to India with all the big degrees in 1923, and after completing his in 1924, he formally entered public life. And for the first 10 years, from 1924 to 1934, Dr. Ambedkar devoted himself out reforms while remaining within the fold of Hindu religion. First movement, take the case of his first movement, the Chaudhar Tale Satyagraha, or his temple entry Satyagraha in Kalaram Mandir in Nashik. Uh, all these were done keeping in mind that his strategy was to bring about reform the society while staying within the fold of Hindu religion to begin with. So while he played that, by the year 1935, Dr. Ambedkar was completely convinced that this religion is not going to change, and therefore he made a historic announcement in a place called Yeola in Nashik, where he said, "I was born Hindu untouchable. I had no choice, but I will not die a Hindu." This was the statement that he made in the country. He announced his intention, Dr. Ambedkar announced his intention to quit religion and embrace some other religion. Dr. Ambedkar worked on for 21 long years. After making the announcement of giving up on Hinduism, he took 21 years to study all the religions in the world. He was an authority on a comparative religion, and before the end of his life, his Mahaparinirvan in December 1956. On 14th October 19, that is barely 50 days before his Mahaparinirvan, embraced Buddhism and gave a Diksha of Buddhism to 100,000 of his followers in a historic self function. During the period 1942 to 6, Mahatma Gandhi announced Quit India movement. The British came back with a counter strategy to include some Indians in the British cabinet in India, and 12 such. There was a cabinet formed which was called a Viceroy's Executive Council. It had 12 members, 6 British and 6, and Dr. Ambedkar was one of them. So Dr. Ambedkar was sworn in the minister, although they were calling he was called Labour Member. It was Dr. Ambedkar was sworn in as the minister in the British cabinet of India. The members of the cabinet were then called the ministers, members of the Executive Council. And during this period, 1942 to 1946, when Dr. Ambedkar minister, he had many other departments under him, including labor, water management, electricity, mineral management, and most importantly, works department. Today, these departments are more than 10 minutes, and all that was handled by Dr. Ambedkar in his capacity as a labor member or minister of labor. It was Dr. Ambedkar, the British minister, who started the employment exchanges in our country. It was Dr. Ambedkar who started the first ever skill development program in our country. It was none other than Babasaheb Ambedkar. We talk about Skill India Mission and all that. That's going on. But beginning was made in the British Raj by Dr. Ambedkar as a minister in the British. Then there were so many acts that were passed regarding welfare in India. The labor welfare reforms initiated by Dr. Ambedkar include action in the working hours of industrial labor. Industrial workers were working 12 hours in a day, reduced to 8 hours by Dr. Ambedkar as the minister. Paid leave for workers, women, and so on. All these reforms where the founding father of all these reforms was none other than Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. All these provisions were brought in by Dr. Minister of Labour in the British government. These reforms are known, but not many know that the pioneer of all these reforms was Dr. Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar also took a great deal of interest in some of the multi projects such as Damodar Valley and Mahanadi. So the talk about interconnecting rivers actually started way back. Was the minister, and he had proposed that idea in a limited way in Bihar. In fact, it was designing the foundations of the fair state that Dr. Ambedkar played a very major role. He not only had academic vision, but he was a thoroughly practical economic administrator par excellence. Dr. Ambedkar vouched for annihilation of caste. In 1936, he wrote a long speech. He wrote one of his best called The Annihilation of Caste. In the story that there was an organization called Zat Paat Todak Mandal in Lahore, which was in India. They invited him as the president of their annual function and annihilation of caste. And Dr. Ambedkar worked very hard on preparing. And then there was a correspondence with the organizers. The organizers requested him to send the draft for us to see, and we can print it and distribute the copy. Reluctantly, but Dr. Ambedkar sent the draft. When they saw the draft, they fainted, because Ambedkar was doing good work, but little bit tinkering here and tinkering there. They did not do anything as fundamental and as forcefully written as Dr. Ambedkar. Ambedkar had said, among other things, he had said that if you want to attack the caste in India, you will have to put, you will have to attack Dharma Shastra. You have to attack Dharma Shastra, destroy them. Without destroying the Dharma Shastra, there is no way you relate the caste in our country. When the organizers saw that, as I said, and they requested him, Dr. Ambedkar, you please drop this para, you change this line, and you modify that. Dr. Ambedkar said, I will not change a word. Take it or leave it. So after final long correspondence, finally it was decided the conference should be cancelled. The conference was cancelled, but this speech prepared, delivered, Dr. Ambedkar published as a book, and that is his famous book, where he also reproduced the entire correspondence between him and the advisors, democratic that he was. The immediate reaction to this book, Mahatma Gandhi. This was the second debate. The immediate reaction came from Mahatma Gandhi, and this was the second debate that Mahatma Gandhi had after the first debate, massive debate in the roundtable conference, the second session. What Mahatma Gandhi was in his journal called Young India, which was later renamed as Harijan, he wrote two critical pieces against the book. And Dr. Ambedkar of Mahatma Gandhi's argument. And it's very interesting to see what it was the second time. And Dr. Ambedkar reproduced Dr. Mahatma and his own rebuttal in the second edition of the book. Basically, the thing, Mahatma Gandhi, it is hard to believe now, but he strongly justified the Varnashram system. Division of our society into Brahman, Vaishya, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, and so on. He defended the Varnashram, saying that this is nothing but division of labor. And division of labor is a natural part this division of labor is required for stability of any society. This is how Mahatma Gandhi defended it. And Ambedkar and his genius who pointed out that what we have in our country is not division of labor alone. Superimposed the division of labor is division of laborers, because division is not based on so-called merit or so-called skills or proficiency. This is based entirely on the of birth, and therefore superimposed on the division of labor of laborers. There is nothing wrong with the division of labor, but what's wrong with that is superimposed on that is the division of laborers. Natural, and India is the only country in the world where it has happened, and caused an irreparable damage to our economic development. This was the argument that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar made, for which Mahatma Gandhi had answered. Dr. Ambedkar was also a great champion of gender equality. As the first law minister of our country, Ambedkar was requested to draft and introduce Hindu code. Don't get carried away by the name. The way Dr. Ambedkar wrote the Hindu code, it was really a huge social reform. And Nehru, our first Prime Minister, Honorable First Prime Minister, told him that I am going to stand by you on this Hindu code bill, and I don't care even if the government comes down. But so revolutionary is this piece of legislation that I'm going to. This is how it started, and but the discussion in the Constituent Assembly, working as a parliament, went on and on and on. And what happened was the delay was deliberately caused because all the orthodox authorities within Congress party and in the opposition, they all got together. They were led by the then President Dr. Rajendra Prasad. And they declared Dr. Rajendra Prasad, the first president of our country, wrote a letter to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the first prime minister, saying that this Hindu code will destroy the family system. It will destroy the social fabric of our country. I am not going to sign. Please don't take it for granted that I will sign if it is approved and brought to me or sent to me for final signature as the President of India. So Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru to Babasaheb Ambedkar and said that Dr. Ambedkar, we cannot get this whole thing through. Let's be happy with 50% of that. Dr. Ambedkar has written that when there is a risk of losing 100, any wise person is content with 50%. So he said, so be it. After he was called again by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the Prime Minister, and Dr. Ambedkar wrote that nothing can be passed from even that 50% is not possible. Dr. Ambedkar was so angry, so agitated that he, on the spot, resigned from his post as a cabinet minister, the first law minister of our country, and left the cabinet. What was this Hindu Code Bill about? Hindu Code Bill was about equal rights to women. It was giving equal rights between boys and sons and daughters. It was giving permission for intercaste marriage. It was paving the way for succession to women, succession to women. So it was basically a major social reform. Dr. Ambedkar was so much ahead of time that the orthodoxy at that time, both party and in the opposition, they came together to oppose and to dispel. And that's why Dr. Ambedkar, he became the only person in the history of our country who resigned to defend gender equality. When we talk about who fought for gender equality, we take the name of Mahatma Phule, which is absolutely right, people, but rarely, if ever, you will find that Dr. Ambedkar's name is as a champion of gender equality. Even the organizations do not recognize it or do not explicitly recognize it, but this was Dr. Ambedkar, that because for the purpose of defending the gender, Dr. Ambedkar resigned as a cabinet minister. Dr. Ambedkar, we all know, as the principal architect of the Constitution, he played a very, very important role. There are some people, we all know them all, they have raised some objections. Now, the Constitution making was a collective effort, but the fact is that the draft committee, which was chaired by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, there were two members who were never, one of them died, one was always abroad. So the entire responsibility came on the shoulders of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. This was highlighted by E.T. Krishnamachari, who later became finance minister of our country. But at that time, he was in the drafting committee. In one of his speeches, he admitted that. Dr. Ambedkar's more important contribution, apart from drafting the Constitution, more important contribution was that Dr. Ambedkar piloted the Indian Constitution through the Assembly. You just imagine the Constituent Assembly and the debates in the Constituent Assembly. Every Indian must read it. Just imagine about the best minds in our country coming together to talk about the future of our country. 300, nearly 300 people, little less than 300. I think something like that. So they all came and they debated. Please also note that the provision in our Constitution was sanctioned, was approved by simple majority. Fourth majority, not two-third majority. Each and every provision was approved, complete consensus. This is what I meant by piloting. You know, sir, introduce each section, each provision, each item, and discuss positive and negative both sides, forged a consensus among such a great group of people of our country. Just imagine in a cooperative housing society meeting, when there is a discussion of raising the salary of a liftman, they spend 4 hours talking about it. Here, people in our country were debating the future of our country, and one person who forged a consensus through all of them, that was Dr. Ambedkar. That was his contribution as drafting the Constitution, that he piloted the Indian Constitution and brought it to grand success. It was Dr. Ambedkar who tried to ensure that the provision of our Constitution was accepted by consensus. It is very interesting. The same Dr. Rajendra Prasad, who was the president of first president of our country, and also of the Constituent Assembly, he has written, and I quote, "I have been sitting on this chair watching the fascinating work that has been doing. I feel that nobody else could have done the job of Dr. Ambedkar," unquote. The contribution made by Dr. Ambedkar is remarkable. However, he has neither been duly recognized nor awarded for his phenomenal contribution. Do you know that title, even the title of principal architect of the Indian Constitution, not given to him by any Indian, not by any Indian organization. It was to him by a British biographer of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. The history that we have to take note of. One more aspect I will conclude, and this is a very important another aspect. Dr. Ambedkar was a critique of linguistic reorganization. This is very interesting and very little known subject. In 1955, Government of India had appointed a committee called Fazl Ali Commission was appointed to get the provinces. They used to call them provinces earlier. Now they are called states. So reorganize on the linguistic basis. The commission came out with a report which was a very simple principle. That was one language, one state. Ambedkar was not well, but he saw that and he was fuming. This is a wrong principle. This principle of having one language, one song, he wrote a small pamphlet, a small book. The principle ought to be not one language, one state, it should be one language. Is that simply quibbling over the words? One language or one state, one language. The Fazl Ali Commission was saying one state. Dr. Ambedkar was saying no, one state, one language. It is the language, but what would have happened had the formula been fully accepted according to that is what happened. If you go by the formula, Fazl Ali formula, one language, then Dr. Ambedkar pointed out that in the north, because of the large, there would be few states which would be very large, like Uttar Pradesh. On the other hand, in the south part of India, there would be many states, there would be small size states. So north and south, they would be divided in a manner that in the north there would be fewer states but large, and in south there would be large number of states but smaller in size. Ambedkar said would create a tension between the north and south of our, and that can become a major problem, a stress point in maintaining the national integrity. This was the argument Dr. Ambedkar had thought about. And he recommended bifurcation of central province, and that has happened. Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. He had recommended Bihar, that has happened, Bihar and Jharkhand. He had recommended trifurcation, that regrettably has still not happened. But this was the vision of Dr. Ambedkar, where he thought about what will happen in future about maintaining the challenge of national integration. So he could think and try to give a solution. Dr. Ambedkar embraced, as I mentioned before, at the end of his career and towards the end of his life. Did he choose Buddhism? Please understand the gravity, the importance of Ambedkar, Dr. Ambedkar choosing Buddhism as the religion. As I said before, establish a society based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. These are said, liberty, equality, and fraternity. These three principles said, I have not borrowed from French Revolution. I have taken this principle from my Guru, Lord Gautam Buddha. So, one religion he wanted, for there were a number of reasons, but the most then is that this is a religion which, as Dr. Ambedkar pointed out, is based on there is no caste system, and secondly, very importantly, he wanted a religion which has come out from the Indian soil. Imagine if Dr. Ambedkar had chosen any religion coming from the fans, what would have happened to the geopolitical situation of our country is a matter about before you call Dr. Ambedkar only a parochial leader of only anti. Dr. Ambedkar is an intellectual stature and contribution in making equality and social justice as the cornerstone of world democracy, India. Dr. Ambedkar deserves an exaltation, a distinctive place in the Indian pantheon with Mahatma Gandhi, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and others. This this happened until recently. Dr. Ambedkar has been traditionally marginalized in stature. He had been relegated until recently as a Dalit leader and at best as a principal architect of the Indian Constitution, and that was done somewhat reluctantly. In fact, Dr. Ambedkar was given Bharat Ratna 4 years after his Mahaparinirvan. It is important to know there is a growing, now there is a important to know that now there is a growing nationwide recognition of Dr. Ambedkar across the entire spectrum of political parties, which is most welcome. Dr. Ambedkar rediscovered posthumously, being resurrected in debates and the events propagating his vision and mission. Dr. Ambedkar has had everyday presence in the lives of more than 200 million strong Dalit communities throughout the country. His ideas and legacy have consistently been inspiring the disadvantaged and the downtrodden of. In fact, on 6th December, that is, which marks Dr. Ambedkar's, more than 2 crore people, they go to Chaitya Bhumi in Mumbai to homage to Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. Which other leader, you name one, which leader has got these kind of feelings after so many years after his Mahaparinirvan? It is heartening to see the widespread and renewed interest in Dr. Ambedkar. Evidently, the Indian society has done enormous damage to itself, not recognizing the national contribution of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. It is in need of the hour to correct this misguided impression and bringing Dr. Ambedkar only to a position of a leader and understand Dr. Ambedkar in his true nationalist spirit and place him in the galaxy of great nationalists of our country. It was my great pleasure and honor to give this lecture on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar under the auspices of Dr. International Center, New Delhi. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Narendra Jadhav, for this erudite lecture. And I'm sure that we may be having as many as questions as we have participants, but certainly we cannot take all the questions due to some technological reasons. So I have shooted my email ID over there, and as and when I would get all those questions, I'll forward to you. But interestingly, I am excited with 2 important questions which I tend to ask you, if you allow me. Shall I?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So the
Yes,
first,
please.
yeah. So the first question is from Dr. Mukti Sanyal. She is a retired principal of Bharati College, University of Delhi. Sir, she is asking, why is it so difficult to give up privileges that one is born with? Does Dr. Ambedkar answer this in writing? I repeat the question. Why is it so
Yeah.
difficult to give up privileges that one is born with? Does Dr. Ambedkar answer in this writing?
Yes, did extensively. In fact, look at his speech that was written, but not annihilation of caste. There he talks about how a stratum has been getting privileges for ages, and he talks about use the system to maintain the dominance of a group of community, a group of society, a strata of society. So he explains how difficult it is, and he talks about a huge weapon used against Dalits traditionally when they try to, and that is social boycotting. Social boycotting, social distancing now. Social distancing is that Dalits have observed that for ages, 3,000 years. But social boycotting in a village, a very, very tough thing to do. because they will not be able to work. Nobody will give them work, nobody will give them even provisions, nothing. So social boycott is a horrible thing, and that there should be a law against it. So it is obviously world history is replete of how the privileged class finds it extremely difficult to give up the privilege, and therefore whenever people stand up against the privileges for some, there is a very bitter reaction, and that we can observe even now. Yeah. Another question.
Okay, sir, the second question I would take off from Dr. Sunil Kumar, who is a librarian and documentation officer in Dr. Ambedkar International Center. His question is,
Mhm.
after constitutional provisions of Dr. Ambedkar's, the situation of
Mm.
scheduled castes and scheduled tribes is still not improved in the entire India. Can you please suggest some ways of the government to realize the vision of Dr. Ambedkar?
Yeah, I have written and spoken extensively on this subject, but constitution thing uh, and its implementation and in annihilation of caste, the machinery to implement all the schemes lies with the privilege, so-called privilege, and that becomes very difficult. I would like to give an example. In 1975, they came out with a very good scheme called Scheduled Tribe Subplan. Tribal 1979, they came up with a very good scheme called Scheduled Caste Plan. Both of these were very, very useful schemes. Funds would be allocated, earmarked by the government of India and states for the welfare of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, only in proportion to at least their share in the population or in the country. So at the national level, scheduled 6.8%, 2011 census, and in terms of scheduled tribes are 8. So out of the total planned expenditure, 60 should have been earmarked for scheduled caste and 8.6 should have been earmarked for the central government level, and similarly at the state level, depending on their shares in those states. It never happened, never happened. When I became a member of the Planning Commission, the then Prime Minister, Honorable Dr. Manmohan Singh, that either we should stop taking scheme or we should implement the scheme so that the benefit reaches. What is this? Schedule the benefit reaching, and others are saying that too much benefits are being given to them. It's not happening. Problems with that. One was that sufficient funds were not earmarked as proportion, as according to their proportion in the population. Second, whatever was earmarked was not spent. And third, a large part of that was merely diverted to other non-scheduled caste welfare purposes. These were the problems with that. This is a problem of implementation. Year after year, this was happening. So Dr. Manmohan Singh, as the Prime Minister, appointed a committee under my chairmanship. I gave a report. Improved, but still it never brought to 16.8 because there were problems which continued to rise. But there was a major increase. After that, and diversion of funds from scheduled caste to not was not happening as an exception. Believe me, it was happening as a rule. In one state, they were why I will name the state. In Delhi, state of Delhi, 120 crores were diverted to Commonwealth Games. And there was an inquiry done, and I was the person with the responsibility of conducting the inquiry. Government was found completely guilty. The action taken, zilch. So that's where there is a difference between what you preach and what you practice. As long as we do not have people merely go by the letter and spirit of the Constitution, it is not possible, it is not going to be possible for the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes to get their which has been given to them by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar in the Constitution.
Okay,
question.
sir, we have many more questions, but I think as and when you say, I would stop. So I would take one more question.
Okay.
This is from Dr. Bharati Sharma. She teaches in Jamia Millia Islamia. She is associate professor over there. Her question is, why Ambedkar politics used against nation inspire of being comprehensively good? I repeat her question again. Why
This,
Ambedkar's politics used against nation inspire of being comprehensively good?
I'm not clear about the question.
This is in spite.
Um,
Why Ambedkar's politics used against nation in spite of being comprehensively good?
no, I understand the word, trying to understand the spirit behind this question. Ambedkar, I don't know what TG means by by the Ambedkar politics. Ambedkar politics of the poor, politics of the downtrodden, politics of inclusion. Our whole policy of inclusive growth. Now, is that going away from Ambedkar? No, it's very much considered. Problem lies in terms of implementation. So, politics of inclusion agrees. Nobody disagrees. But then, how do you interpret when you get the power? That's problem comes. So you can shoot another question, or as you were saying, I'm willing to answer more questions. I have no problem. But
Okay,
there are other
right.
problems. But I have my email ID. Please, my email ID. Dr. That is in doctor. Dr. Narendra. Dr. Narendra dot Jadhav, not Yadav. Jadhav, ADHAV. Dr. Narendra dot at gmail.com. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter. You can shoot a question. At least in course of time, at least I will definitely respond to your questions.
Okay, sir. So we take last question of
Yeah.
Dr. Dhaneshwar Bhoy. He is a postdoctorate scholar.
Doctor.
Yeah, Dr. Dhaneshwar Bhoy, and he
Okay.
is a postdoctorate scholar of Dr. Ambedkar International Question. His
Yeah.
question primarily focus on Dr. Ambedkar's role on Kashmir issues and national integration.
About the national integration, and Dr. Ambedkar talked about national integration, and the example that I gave, states, the reorganization of linguistic states, that was a very important at that particular then and now also, and in future. So, Ambedkar was always a champion of national integration. As far as Kashmir, please understand that Dr. Ambedkar was also a hardcore and a hardcore Democrat. And as a Democrat, he wanted place. So at that time, we had, let's not go back history, but everybody knows that there was this demand for place. And for some reason, we declined that. And there was a resolution which our neighborly friend keeps raising in United Nations. At one point, we had agreed for plebiscite, but then we backed out. So position at that time was that there should be a plebiscite in the people of Jammu and Kashmir then should decide their fate. So that was, thank you for all these questions. I'm sure you have many more questions, but I would like you to leave with those questions, because unless you have those questions, you will not seek answers. And in the process of your seeking answers, I can be of little help. I would be more than delighted. And the opportunity to thank all of you for all the very good questions that were raised. And I thank you, Varunji, for organizing this whole thing. And please send this recorded link of this. which I can then put on YouTube and on my Facebook for further propagation of the thoughts and ideas that were debated in this. Thank you.
I am personally grateful to you for sparing time, in fact, which has been long due, but due to certain one or other reasons, you were not able to spare time for us. But now you have accepted our kind invitation and came and delivered a wonderful lecture. Before ending this meeting, just as a formality, I would request Director Dr. Ambedkar International Center to say a few words as vote of thanks. If Director can hear my voice, he can just speak now. I have unmuted. There may be some technical problem, I think. So with this, sir, we may take your leave. And once again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Anjali.